Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. We're really, really excited that this is happening. Um, I see a lot of familiar faces from folks who joined us last night at the supporter event at the Cambridge Brewing Company. That was so much.
That was
I'm gonna see if I can get this to have the speakers be. Oh, I think maybe
Hi, Stacy.
add pin, add pin.
There you go.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Stacy.
Lots of familiar friends. I love it. Um, Wonderful. Okay, great. So I think I'll get started. And I'm going to also turn off the waiting list. One more minute. There we go. Okay, folks should be able to come in now. All right, great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. I'm Marielle. I'm the development manager here at Passim, and this is our first Passim Supporter Appreciation Week, and this is one of the events that we're having for you all. And it's an honor to get these three folks with us electronically, at least today. We have Bill Nowlin, we have Betsy Siggins, and Matt Smith. And I'll just say a few words about them each before I open the floor to them. And just a couple of housekeeping things. If we could stay muted for the duration of the conversation, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions or issues, just put them in the chat and I'll be watching that. And then we'll save like 10, 15 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have any questions for these three, feel free to put them in the chat as well. We are recording this, so it will be available at some point after today as well. All right, so I'll dive in. So I'll start with Betsy. Betsy Siggins is a central figure in the Cambridge folk music scene. She was the founding member of Club 47 and has worked in the nonprofit sector in various roles and organizations. Betsy was the executive director at Passim for 12 years and helped expand the programming to include the School of Music, which is now celebrating its 25th year. And since then, she's also founded the New England Folk Music Archives, Folk Music New England. Bill Nowlin, is the co-founder of Rounder Records, an independent record label that focuses on American roots music, and he is also an avid baseball fan, having authored dozens of books on the Red Sox or Red Sox players. And Matt Smith first started as a volunteer at Passim in 1995 and has never left. He's still with us and is now the managing director of the club, and he books all of the incredible music that we get to hear almost every night of the year. So thank you to the three of you for being here. I'm going to mute myself now and turn it over to you all.
Thanks, Marielle. Well, so we want to talk a little bit about the history of Passim and Club 47 and Club Passim in general, but also want to get some of the origin stories to how people really got their start in this world, what drew them to it. I started coming to the club in 1993, started working there in 1995, had been a big music fan. And, this is in days before the internet. Good luck trying to find Club Passim back then. It was, hidden down a little side street in a basement, and I had a hard time figuring out where the heck it was. But the to give a broad history, the original Club 47 opened up at 47 Mount Auburn Street in 1958. It moved to its current location on Palmer Street in the fall of 1963. So it's been 61 years that it's been in its current location. The club closed down in the fall of 1968, reopened as Passim in 1969, and ran as Passim until the fall of 1994. It reopened as Club 47, a nonprofit, in the spring of 1995. It reincorporated as a nonprofit in 1994, but opened its doors again in the spring of 95. and has been running consistently there since then, apart from a little break about 4 years ago that we all took from everything, going out to shows, etc. But we still presented music in many ways that way. Now, Betsy, I'll start with you. You were not there at the very, very start of the Club 47, right?
Correct.
And what had did you just start coming as a music fan?
I think, yes, but I think I actually started at the Cafe Yana in Kenmore Square, waitressing, and fell in love with music. I mean, the Cafe Yana was not as big as a minute, but there was a lot of music coming out of it. And then I transferred over to Cambridge. I was at the Golden Vanity as well, but I moved over to Club 47, I guess 1960 something. That's
And
as that's about as precise as I can get. But I very quickly met Joan Baez, because we had been in college together. In 1958, she and I and Jim Queskin met at the freshman orientation at BU. None of us stayed at BU long enough to even say the words. But Joan was starting to play, and she was playing mostly for her friends and family. And I I knew Joyce and what was the other woman's name? Joyce and
Paula.
Paula. And they had started Passim Club 47 as a jazz club. And because they had both graduated from Brandeis and loved music. And I don't know how they got the money together to rent the place, but they did. Um,
I mean, back then it was up probably only $10 a month or something like that, right?
yeah, 10. The owner of the building was a woman named Bertha Cohen. And Bertha Cohen owned a lot of property in Cambridge. She owned the buildings down on the river, those big apartment buildings. What am I thinking of? Well, it doesn't matter. Um, but when Joan started playing there briefly, not for a long time, Bertha decided that she hated folk music, that it was the music of the communists. And she was hot on our tail to get out. And that was when we transferred from Mount Auburn Street to Passim's site now. She really did kick us out.
Yeah. So when you started at Club 47, you started just as a waitress.
Yes.
And
Yep.
how did that transform into becoming someone who was running the venue?
Determination, lack of other people wanting the job.
It sounds like a familiar story, Betsy. So Bill, now Rounder Records didn't start until 1970, but you had been coming to the Club 47, right? Did you ever go to the original site on Mount Auburn Street?
I did, yeah. My college roommate was Ken Irwin, who became a co-founder of Rounder. We just were assigned together by the authorities, who determined who would be freshman roommates. And I guess they figured there might be a record company 8 years in the future, but whatever foresight they had, I don't know. We began September '62 at Tufts, and we each had record collections, like kind of like you have in the background there, Matt. LPs, not that many, a few, but we each had a couple of folk music things. Ken was more advanced than I. I had kind of more of the generic Kingston Trio and a couple things like that. But he had a couple of albums by the Greenbrier Boys, and
Mm.
they really caught our imagination. and we began looking around for this music. We went to a few times. I'd say maybe a dozen to the Mount Auburn Street location, and mostly when we were still teenagers, 18 years old, 1963, and so forth. And I have a couple of nice memories from there, a little less distinct these days, maybe, but I know where the stage was. There was a big plate glass window behind where we usually sat. And but to see a fair number of people. Kerner, Ray, and Glover were one of our favorites at the time. There were times that there were somebody on the calendar, and it was very inexpensive. It was a nonprofit, and they were in it just for the music. Sound familiar? And the we really enjoyed it, and it kept coming back. We went to the Cafe Yana. I saw Bob Dylan actually play at the Cafe Yana one night, and I guess around 63 or maybe early 64. It got to be 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was a curfew, and he said, pull down the window shades. I want to sing a little more. And he sang a few extra songs, and that was kind of his rebel side, maybe. But just I didn't go to all that many places, the Unicorn, a couple of the other clubs in town, but for the most part, we went to 47. We became, over time, regulars, maybe coming a couple times a week. And it was a very informed group. There was a line usually that formed beforehand. And I can remember standing 10 or 15 minutes in line talking to other people. And somebody, we were there to see the Osborne Brothers, maybe, bluegrass band. People would start saying things like, boy, I really love that third song on side 2 of their new album. And everybody knew what they were talking about. It was
That's
that well
amazing.
informed. I mean, that was an audience that came to see them, of course. But it was a very informed and congenial group.
Well, now, so Betsy, going back to the 47, and now was it actually a nonprofit organization or was it a
Yeah.
private club? Because I know that that's a little confusing because I know that there were issues with old Massachusetts blue laws
Correct.
about how having serving beverages and having a certain number of stringed instruments. And so to get around those laws, it became a private club where, you paid $1 and you got a membership forever, right? Sort of a
Yes.
thing. So
Yes.
it wasn't truly a nonprofit organization, it was a
Right.
private club.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That's but fascinating just sort of Massachusetts history in, I think that most of those blue laws have been stricken from the record, but I remember even when I was growing up reading things about, it was actually illegal to eat peanuts in church and things like that. There were just these
Nice.
ridiculous laws. But so Betsy, in thinking about when you first came into the Club 47, and when it closed down, so it was in its original location for 5 years, then it moved over to Palmer Street
Yeah.
and ran for 5 years before it closed down. What did things look like in 1968? How had it changed, and how had the scene changed for you? I know a lot of people were getting their start there in their young 20s, and there were probably life changes that were going on in the next 5 years.
Yes. I think that people like Tom Rush, the Charles River Valley Boys, they all made their mark early in the club. And what was it like? It was a place I went to every single day of my life. I also ran the art gallery that was there in the afternoons. Everybody had a lot of different jobs. And I, of course, remember Rooney and Byron very well, coming in and taking the reins and running themselves ragged. With Bertha Cohen sold that building on Mount Auburn Street to, I think, to Harvard University, with the understanding that the club would be safe for 10 years. And then after 10 years, it was going to become Harvard's property. I think that's how it happened. And then Harvard kept ringing the rent bill. They kept it on the records. So every month when we didn't pay rent was another mark against us. And it wasn't until very late in the 1990s when we were able, I guess maybe it was the 50th anniversary of the club, where we were finally raising enough money to pay Harvard back. And they were so amazed that we did that. They came over and congratulated us. But I don't know what the arrangement is now.
We're just squatting now. There's
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody.
Hmm.
So people were kind of moving on. I know that, Woodstock had not yet happened, but
Right.
the boom of folk and rock coming together, a lot of artists were moving on and getting signed to major labels and doing bigger things. And so the scene kind of fractured a bit
Yeah.
when it had closed down. Now, it reopened in 1969 as Passim, which was not a music venue. It was a shop and it was a cafe.
Right.
But the story is that the Nowlins kept having people coming by saying, "Where's the music?" And so they started to have music again. And now, Betsy, at that point, you had moved away, correct? You were in
New York.
you were in New York by then. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Bill, do you remember when Passim reopened? Because it
I
was.
don't in particular. I ended up going to the University of Chicago for a couple of years in graduate school and then dropping out after Martin Luther King was killed and getting a little more active in other events. But I don't really remember that stretch.
But now Rounder Records started up in 1970,
1970, yeah.
and we've got a prop here, the very first Rounder record
Yep.
right
Yeah, I
here.
took that photograph in Union Grove, North Carolina.
So this is Rounder record 0001. I can't even imagine what number is is on now. Um, and this is back when, Rounder Records lived at 727 Somerville Avenue in Somerville, Massachusetts. It later moved to Willow Avenue, right around the corner from me, for a time. And then eventually moved to Camp Street. Was that the third address?
There are a couple others in there too, 65 Park Street and 28 Otis Street in East Cambridge.
So it moved around a lot, but
Yeah.
basically being run from apartments.
Yeah, the first three were, well, the second floor apartment in a place I rented lived over an old lady that didn't hear that well, fortunately, because we could play music louder. And then moved to 65 Park Street, another second floor apartment. Then Ken and Marion had moved in. They had been, we'd gone their separate ways in graduate school, but came back together again and started up the company. I called it kind of a hobby that got out of control because we were certainly never in it imagining it to be a business. It was just we put out some records and then people kept encouraging us and had different ideas. What about this person? What about that person? I'll donate the liner notes. Don't worry about that. All kinds of help that people gave us. It was a wonderful experience in that regard. And then we actually ended up buying the house at Willow Avenue and all lived there and ran it out of the basement of that place for several years, and then moved to a place in 95 Winchester Street in Medford on the other side of Ball Square. Then to East Cambridge, and then eventually to the one Camp Street address that was home for quite a number of years until we ended up moving out to Burlington.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gone other ways since then.
Right, right. But so had Betsy and Bill, had either of you started as musicians or did you come into this as fans?
Fan. Fan.
Yeah.
I've often said that if you asked me to sing three notes in a row and be on key, I would never make it except the way that a monkey can supposedly play the Star Spangled Banner if you give them a million years or something. But I have absolutely no music talent. I tried to learn how to play the banjo. I tried to learn how to play the bass. I couldn't concentrate enough. I'm thinking of too many other things.
Yeah, I myself, like, I have several instruments,
Hmm.
and I can play many of them a little bit. It's fun for me. I didn't think of going into a career in music as a musician, but when I first started coming to the club as a fan, and then when it closed down in '94, I was devastated, because it was a place that I had fallen in love with. I was a couple years out of college and had been going to all the big stadium concerts and amphitheater concerts. And then when I was old enough to go to clubs, I was starting going to clubs and seeing music that was more of my generation, and felt a deeper connection with what was going on. And the venues I kept going to were getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And when a friend of mine turned me on to a local, or a modern local folk scene, which I didn't know existed, and I started to dig in and started coming to the club regularly. And when it closed down, I was heartbroken because I had just found this place a couple years before. And when it the word came around that Rounder Records was putting up this loan to reopen it, and to pay off back rent, and to reopen, they were looking for volunteers. I started volunteering immediately. This was back in the day when they'd put a little table outside of the door, the locked door to the club, and with a notebook where you could write down your landline phone number and your address. And so I got a call saying, like, hey, come on in and start volunteering. Started volunteering at the box office, and then started to learn how to run sound. And here we are 29 years later. But I think we all came into this as a fan, because that's how you come into this. There's a passion for it.
Yep.
Now, Rounder put out a record, a CD, after the club reopened as a nonprofit organization, to benefit the venue and to help get things going again, called One More Song. It was tracks put together of people that were favorites of the Passim years, to help get things going again. I remember for I don't know how many years it took, but we put a full page Rounder ad in our newsletter, as trade to pay off the back uh, loan that was put up to reopen the club again. Now, Betsy, did you ever go to Passim when Bob and Rayanne were running it?
I was living in New York, so no.
Okay, but Bill,
I went frequently, knew them both. It's not like any of us hung around with the people that ran the place. Betsy was in another world as far as we were concerned. She was royalty, her and Jim Rooney and some of the other folks. And we just were there as fans. We just went and watched the music. We knew who she was, but she was we were just there as fans. And if we played music, maybe we'd be doing that. But other people had all the talent, and we really so many shows over the years.
and Betsy, you came back to the Boston area in '96. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
'96, and you joined the board of directors because the club had been reincorporated as a nonprofit organization. And
Correct.
and as any new nonprofit organization, it was a struggle. It was a struggle to
Absolutely.
find people to work. It was a struggle to find ways to make a budget work, to get people to
I
start to
I
come back
worked
into the club.
I worked a whole year with no salary because there wasn't any.
Yeah, yep. And I mean, back then, I started volunteering in the spring of '95. I was working there part time by the end of the summer. Learning how to run sound, learning how to run shows. I think one of my first shows to work was a Ramblin' Jack Elliott show, who'd been already playing there for decades upon decades. And to give people context, our performers now, we're programming 7 nights a week. We have performers that are college age and sometimes even younger than college age. But back at the beginning of this month, Jim Kweskin just played at the club again, and so there are people, back for our 60th anniversary concert back in November of 2019, where we honored Betsy. Joan Baez was there for that, and so we maintain these connections. The history of the club is of three distinct eras. There was the Club 47 era, which is iconic in many ways because of the way the music world was.
Yeah.
You ended up with these artists being elevated to national and international levels, and there weren't as many people that were hitting those heights back then or getting that kind of recognition. And then, so that was, a private club. And then for 25 years, Bob and Rayanne Donlin ran the space. And the joke was it wasn't a nonprofit, but they didn't make any money. And they would put on shows where sometimes, or often an artist would come in and do two shows Friday night, two shows Saturday night, an afternoon matinee on Sunday that was broadcast on the radio, and then a Sunday night show. And there are stories about people that over the course of these 6 shows would have 20 people come out and see them. And then there were stories about Greg Brown coming in and doing it and not repeating a single song over those 6 shows. He would just do different songs for everything. And there have always been threads of people that have been playing at the venue throughout their career, from the Club 47 to now. I mean, Jim Rooney has a live record live from the club in the 70s. There have been many records over the years that we have hung on the walls in the venue now of things that have been recorded in the club. Whether it be one track, like on one of Bill Morrissey's Rounder records. The song "Car and Driver" was recorded at the club. But like back to Queskin's got some live things from the club, and Mark Spolstra and Jackie Washington, all the way up to current artists that are putting out tracks from the club, and albums from the club. So there's a continuity in the history of the kind of music that has been presented and the way it is presented. It has always been a listening room, a room where people come in for a show. It's not background music, it is foreground music. People go there to see something specific because they enjoy that kind of experience. And there are people that want to just party and talk with their friends while something's going on in the background because it's an exciting atmosphere. That's not really this space. And throughout the history, we've done many, many different things in the room and many different kinds of things. And we've worked a lot, especially in the last several years, in looking at diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging in a way that in the 60s, there were a lot of different artists coming just because that's what the scene looked like. Isn't that true, Betsy? There was
Yeah, I want to just interject.
Sure.
Um, when Newport folk music started, which was 59, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and Ralph Rinsler was on that board, and I had recently met Ralph through the Greenbrier Boys, and what they succeeded in doing was getting gigs for artists that had gotten to Newport and needed another stop if they could get one, for a little bit of change. And that is exactly how we got people like Mississippi John Hurt. The Staple Singers had 5 nights one time. But none of those artists could stay in any hotel in Massachusetts. So we lucked out. They stayed with us. Not all of them at the same time, mind you. But it was a great treat to be able to meet Lightning Hopkins and Booker White and those people that really were the backbone of Southern music. And we loved them all.
Yeah, and you were living right outside of Harvard Square, correct?
Right across the street from Mount Auburn Hospital.
Yeah, and I know that Peter Wolf talks about his apartment being a hang for people, after shows and before
Oh yeah.
shows.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you know,
And
The
what,
like,
club had a great diversity of offering too. Betsy mentioned a number of blues performers. Um, a couple of, I mean, there was Jim Kwesigan and the Jug Band. There were the Charles River Valley Boys. There were regulars, but then there were touring acts. I mean, including some fairly large and loud bands. Muddy Waters played there with his
yeah,
full blues band. Howlin' Wolf I saw
yeah,
at the Club
it,
47, big
J-
Chicago blues band. And then there were other performers that had just become known to those people who were out investigating the folk area. Doc Boggs, I remember. He
yeah.
was like an 80-year-old banjo player from North Carolina. And I remember I was sitting in the front row and he broke his banjo string, took it off, and as he replaced it, he put the other one on the ground, and I picked it up as kind of a souvenir. And he said, "Take good care of that. That's the first banjo string I've broken in more than 25 years." Just a little anecdote,
that's
but
amazing.
a wide spectrum of music.
But
Yeah.
and I think that's that, in thinking about that wide spectrum of music, Rounder Records, which you you could arbitrarily say it is a folk music label in whatever large scale that means, really dug into traditional and indigenous music from around the world, and really brought this idea of folk music and the breadth of it to a larger scale.
Well, we were inspired by all the folks that ran Club 47 and this variety of musics they brought in there. They helped expose us to a lot of different kinds of music. There were other scenes going on, of course. There was New York and Izzy Young and the Folklore Center, and we traveled. We hitchhiked to places in those days and go to catch this event or that event, and just following the music in a sense. And but the variety of musics inspired us to do the same.
And something that we've talked about at the club, and folks like you understand this with Barry Schneier has a brand new book out called The Song Is Still Being Written, and it's a photography book that is centered around the club and people that have played there over the years, and it includes folks back from the Club 47 all the way up to some of our newest performers now. And there's an exhibit around this book at the Folk and Americana Roots Hall of Fame if folks want to go down to there. It's at the Bach Center in downtown Boston, and it really shows that kind of breadth of what it means to be in a folk music space and in a folk music world. Now, folks should also pick up Bill's book, which is right here, of his history with Rounder Records, and there are books and a film about Rounder Records as well, that folks can check out. But that idea of the song is still being written. Like this is a continuum. We are all links on a never-ending chain moving forward. Or you could say moving forward and backward at the same time. Where we are taking elements of history and bringing them into the future, and always being mindful of that. That's something that I think about all the time with the club. Is its history, and and where we've been and what we've done, and also where we can go forward. And I'm going to drop a link into the chat too. This is a link for a GoFundMe to help fund Betsy's memoir, because that's got to happen. So make sure that you make a donation to that and help fund that. um, People ask me when I'm going to write a book, and I'm like, I don't know. Someday maybe. But I've still got some years in me of doing this, in the practical side of things. Now, I know a lot of people that are here in the chat have been involved at Passim in various ways. We have current staff, we have former board, we have volunteers, we have people that are fans of music. Should we open this up to the public and
Sure.
Sure.
see if folks have any questions?
I saw a question in the chat myself there
Yeah,
from
Brian.
Don Cohen,
Oh, and
asking if my two partners, Ken and Marion, are still involved in music. We are. We sold Rounder a few years ago, actually a little more than 10 years ago. We worked out an arrangement that we're allowed to keep producing music, but that kind of over with the pandemic and all that kind of changed. But in the last few months, we've started a new record company called Down the Road Records. Our first new album is by Tony Trischka. And that's kind of interesting because he was on our third album that was released in October 1971. And here we come along with our first album, same guy, Tony Trischka, wonderful banjo player and all kinds of guests on there. It's done really well. We'll see where we go from here. We've got a number of things in the works.
And I see Brian's got a question in there about how did the musicians get audiences to come to Passim and what relation to WERS and WUMB to feature many Passim performers. There is not a formal relationship, but it is a community relationship. We give tickets away on WUMB. WERS doesn't have the specific kind of programming that they used to in terms of the coffee house and shows like that. But any local radio station is going to be part of that process. I host a radio show called the Local Music Cafe on WMVY down in the Vineyard, and so I present a lot of independent New England artists and help talk about them and help get the word out. So how do musicians get audiences to come to Passim? There are any number of ways. I remember back in the days of in the 90s when people would have a party and you'd have your mailing cards that you would actually mail to people monthly, and you get an address and put a stamp on them, and that's how you let them know about your gigs. And you would put information in the Folk Almanac and the Boston Phoenix and all these sorts of publications. Now it is mostly social media and websites and things like that. So there are any number of ways to try to get people to come to shows. I just saw someone post about like, oh, here's a picture of me in the Boston area. And someone was like, oh, you were in the Boston area? It's like, oh God. You're like, yeah, last week I was there, and oh, I wish I'd known about it. I'm like, no, that's the problem with the algorithms. When you're being forced by big tech to see something or other, there was it was a it's a difficult task to reach the right people at the right time. Yeah, WCAS did used to host the afternoon radio shows from Passim. After that, it was WERS that did it through up until, I don't know, probably the late 90s. We had that relationship. But when that shut down, there was an actual phone jack with a quarter-inch attachment in the sound booth that you plugged in to send the signal right to the radio station. And we've talked with others about doing some live from Passim. We have archives upon archives upon archives of recordings from the club in the last 30 years. And we want to start getting some of that out, whether it be through an NPR radio program or through membership benefits and things like that. But we want to get the music out to the world, because when we talk about the history of the club back to the 47, we're still making that kind of history. Anais Mitchell did Hadestown at Club Passim before it was a Broadway show. And there are, from Allison Russell to, Brandy Carlisle and like all these folks that have played the club before. People sometimes don't realize that it starts somewhere, but the artists remember, because, Brandy Carlisle will talk about her first big solo headline show in the Boston area was at Club 47, was at Club Passim, and still talks about that from stage, and has a whole cohort of folks that she brings around that a lot of them have connections with the club, both currently and historically, meaning that she has Allison Russell in her band and she has Sister Strings in her band, but then she's also getting out and doing things with Joni Mitchell. So she's tying things right back to the old Club 47.
Matt, I have a question.
Yes.
Um, and you kind of alluded it in that answer, but can we just take a moment and talk about the future of Passim, kind of what we're doing to try to broaden the communication and just take Passim into the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, well, as you were saying, like, our School of Music is now 25 years old. It's kind of amazing to think that that was one of the original programs of the newly minted nonprofit of Club Passim. We have 4 different grant programs that give artists money for any number of projects. We have all of our community programs. We have at least 4 different free outdoor concert series that happen that bring music out to the public in Cambridge throughout the summer and even into the fall. And our folk collective, which just started a couple years ago, which is bringing in a cohort of a dozen artists and thought leaders coming into the club and talking about what does the future of folk music look like, both on stage and off. Because the conversation that is often had about the whitening of folk music overall is about the stage and not always about the audience that is watching it. And so we're trying to really look at ways to be more inviting and inclusive to a much wider group of people, because I think that there were times when it was a much more mixed group of people that were not just on stage but off stage as well. So that is something that we are committed to and working hard on.
I see another question in the chat. Stacy and Bruce said that they were there at the late night performance of Hadestown.
Mm.
That must have been special. And Bruce asked, is anybody writing a history of the club? Is there an archive anywhere?
We're building on our website. We're trying to build an interactive history of the club, with kind of names and dates and events. That's not necessarily going to be a narrative. It'll be more of a timeline. But it's something that there are books that have been written about the scene in general. When you go back to a book like Baby Let Me Follow You Down, which is about the Cambridge and Newport scene of the 60s, there is no definitive full 65-year history of what's been going on. We're living it right now, and so we haven't been writing it. And will one day there be a definitive? I don't think there will, because I hope it goes on forever. I hope it keeps expanding and keeps growing and keeps evolving. And I'd love to see that there is a documentary out there called For the Love of the Song that is about the Club 47. And I would love to see a documentary about Club Passim as it exists today. If anyone has a film company that wants to put that together for us, that'd be great. But even in modern times, when you think about historical markers, the Club 47 lasted for 10 years. Passim lasted for 25 years. We're coming up on 30 for Club Passim. And even things that have been, like I started the Campfire Festival 26 years ago. So things that are in the modern history have also been around for a long time. But our Iguana Fund, the Passim Iguana Music Fund, has been around for more than 10 years. The school has been around for 25 years now. The Folk Collective, we're only 2 years in. That is kind of our newest and freshest thing. And I'm very excited by what the next things that will become cornerstones and benchmarks of what we do, what those next things are, how those happen, because we've never been about sitting back on our laurels and looking and
Can
saying,
I just can I make a plug for Folk New England?
absolutely, please do.
I guess it's almost 10 years now that after leaving Passim, we just didn't know what to do with all the music that we had accumulated. And luckily, UMass Amherst was very interested in our history. And so over these last 10 years, I have been sending different New England artists into that archive. And it's UMass Amherst at the Folk New England. And for instance, we've got Tom Rush, Jim Kweskin, a lot of musicians are now finding us when we just started out looking for people who might need a place to put their archives. And it's a wonderful archive. It's really great. And anybody can go and look it up.
And it's interesting to think, like for the recording, there's all those recordings from the Club 47. And then also, once in a while I'll see pictures of things from the 70s from the club, but there's not a lot of inside photographs from the Club 47 and from Passim out there. I know they're out there. I know people have them out there, and we'd love for them to get in touch with us and show us your pictures. I've got some things that I've had sent to me, but now in the digital world where everything is captured and archived, I hope that we don't lose those things from times gone by as we amass terabytes of data from the current. We have been recording shows of the club for years. We have our live streams of the shows that are archived as well. So we're amassing a lot of information out there, which we offer to the artists as resource now. When an artist plays at the club, we give them a copy of their live stream, and they can do with it as they wish. It is their content, and so it'll be amazing to see in the next 10 years what comes of those things and who goes on to great success and has us as part of their origin story. Are there any other questions out there?
Feel free to unmute yourself or, oh, Bruce, you looks like you're raising your hand.
So, Matt, can you just kind of talk us through how you think about scheduling a month or 2 month period at the club? I mean, are you trying to balance different kinds of shows and artists, or I mean, what's your thinking when it's time to schedule the next 2 or 3 months? How are you thinking about that?
Well, usually I'm thinking 6 months and beyond out there. I've got people. Some of it is just responding to people who are looking for gigs. Whether it be the regulars that are on the schedule or agents with a new artist that want to kind of get them into the club. There is a lot of strategy involved in okay, do I want to put a touring act on a weekend in the summer when you're up against festivals and you're up against just a nice day at the beach or things like that, and our fall and winter, have a lot of annual events. So I've got to kind of think about that and strategize ahead of time, holding spaces for things that I know go in certain spots, while also keeping an open calendar for new opportunities and to reach out to other artists. I go to at least a few conferences every year where I seek out new artists to bring in and try to learn about what's going on out there in the world at large. But, so some of it is bringing back the tried and true, and then always making sure to hold space for expansive programming. But yeah, right now, it's funny because this time of year I am booking so far out, but then when people are asking me in February for dates in the fall, there's not a lot left in the fall. But in people could be asking me in April for shows in July, and I probably got a lot of open dates in the summertime. It's just the cyclical nature of touring, but also artists understanding like, oh well, in the summertime I'm trying to get festival gigs and plan travel. Um, there's a funny balance when you're programming 7 nights a week, because that's the other side of that is, you can have artists come in, bigger touring artists come in and do a show on a Monday or Tuesday and have a full house, and then have your weekend available to give someone a shot that needs that weekend more so than they're going to be able to bring people in on a Monday or Tuesday.
Well, we just have a couple minutes left, and I'm wondering if I could ask each of you to share a particularly special moment that you had at either Club 47 or Club Passim.
Well,
Take it, Betsy.
the night that Bob Dylan showed up was the night that Eric von Schmidt was on the stage, and there was a lot of drinking going on, and we were all just like on pins and needles. And Dylan got up and played a bad harmonica, and then sang with Eric, if you can call it singing, but it was nonetheless a very memorable evening.
I mentioned my dog Bog's banjo story. I'm not sure. I don't know. There's just so many people that we saw over so much
Yeah,
time. I mean, we were there twice a week as fans. There'd be something else to be running it, but just so many people. It inspired us, obviously. Still does.
Yeah,
we
you know,
ran we ran a night show at the Harvard University radio station for years. I ran it with a guy named Dan Becker. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but it was really very cool to reach out to Harvard students because many of them would not have known about the club except through this kind of an arrangement. Um, I'm trying to think of something else. Oh, well, I don't know if Harvard still does the bluegrass show in the mornings. Do you know, Bill?
WHRB, yeah. Every Saturday morning, I listen. WHRB Hillbilly at Harvard.
Right.
And then there's a show afterwards, Hillbilly Jamboree, that picks up where they left off.
hmm.
Country music, some bluegrass, and old time.
One of my fond memories is about Bob and Rayanne Donlin. You know, Bob was the front man, and he reminded me a bit of Ed Sullivan. He was kind of stiff and laconic. And everybody knew, though, that Rayanne ran the show. They were just wonderful to work with. And when we did our Live at Passim show on Sundays.
Yeah, for me that Hadestown show is one of my fondest moments. But just before the pandemic, I got to have a 50th birthday show at the club, which was really, really special. But then, you know, I remember being at Betsy's 60th birthday show back like, you know, 5 years ago, you know, when that happened.
It wasn't 5 years ago, you idiot.
But you know, like, but people, the funny thing is that, you know, I've been at so many birthday shows at the club. We've had a Mark Corelli birthday show, a Katie Curtis birthday show, a Rob Lawrence birthday show, you know, like all these folks that choose to have momentous birthdays in that space. Dinty Child did one. We did one for Dinty's wife, Carol, you know, and people see that space as the place to have a celebration of their own life. And that's pretty special. That's a pretty special thing.
Anyone else in the audience want to jump in? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to share
I guess I'll just share that I moved here in 1984 for grad school, and I don't remember who took me. Someone said, "Oh, we got to go catch music. Place is great," and I didn't know who I was seeing, and it was Bill Staines, who I would, of course, go on to see probably 30 times in my life. But like, that was my first time at Passim seeing the great Bill Staines, and so many amazing people that have enriched our lives. So. Yeah,
one of my wonderful moments in life was when I was just diagnosed with breast cancer. I found that my oncologist was Stacy Gore, and he's been coming to the club forever. And so there was a really wonderful connection for me. And I thank you, darling.
And it's so good to see you, darling.
Me too. Thank you.
All right, and Jamie Barth there is saying that she had her 50th birthday there with the Resophonics at the club, and that was, Jamie was the chair of our board for a while, and was a stalwart volunteer for many, many, many years. And I know tunes into a lot of the live streams still. It's good to see you, Jamie.
I was just going to say that my first time was probably in '77, and it was Josh White Jr. and Artie Traum, who I'd never heard of. I loved the show, and I started coming regularly. And like Bruce, I think I probably saw Bill Staines 30 times. And a memory I have is just waiting in line in on the street there to get in. You didn't get to reserve tables. You had to get there early and wait in line in the cold, and you felt like this was something special. It was worth it. And I had certain people like that, him and Buskin and Bateau and Mason Daring and Jeannie Stahl and Vance Gilbert and Phil Morrissey, Greg Brown, all these people that I just loved. And I would go over and over and over again and always drag new people to see them. And it's just been like that for years. So I thank you all for keeping it going. Oh, and Bill, I just went and looked in my record collection. Can you see
Yeah.
this?
It's a little out of focus, but
Yeah, Rounder Folk 1.
yeah.
Ah,
That was our first, not in that version you're holding, but that was our first compact disc.
Hmm.
there it is.
Yeah, Rounder was one of the first labels to really embrace the digital technology in its day, and turn into an all CD label.
It's interesting to people mentioning the guy that I called Billy Staines, because I actually knew him growing up in Lexington. We used to play baseball in the backyard of the Duffy's house, and just way back.
I've just posted WCAS has a thing online. I won't mention where, but in social media. And Jim Chevalier, who was the producer of Live at Passim for many years, posted a lovely video of a version of Bill Staines we met at the Roseville Fair. And I'm not sure if it's going to pop up, but I posted it. It's just a lovely video that captures the sorrow and joy of a couple that have been together for many, many years. And even if you've heard that song once or twice, I think this will touch your heart as well. It's an Irish duo, but I'm forgetting their names, but it's in the video.
All right. Well, this was amazing. This was so special to hear from you, Bill, Betsy, and Matt, and from all of you to hear your stories. It's one of the things I love about Passim, and I think is so special is we have this really, really rich community of people who are passionate about, something that transcends Passim, which is, I think, connection through folk music. So thank you all for joining us, and a big thank you to Bill, Betsy, and Matt for sharing all of your stories. And thank you all for tuning in. This was really, really wonderful.
Thank you.
All
Thanks
right.
for putting this together,
Thanks.
Marielle.
Yeah, totally. We'll see where we can put the recording. So it'll be available for everyone.
And maybe if you could send us the links, that would be really nice.
Sure. Yeah, I'll
They're
go
in
ahead
the
and do
chat.
that. Yeah.
I was paying attention, didn't get to catch some of them. So
Yeah, I've been making a list of what's been talked about.
okay,
So
thanks.
I'll send those out. All right.
Bye.
Thanks
Thank
everyone.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.